Okay, we are live. Welcome to this webinar from the Middle East Institute. I am pleased to introduce two terrific authors who have done almost the impossible, unravel Saudi Arabia. We have Susanne Koelbl, who's written Behind the Kingdom's Veil, Ben Hubbard, MBS, which has come to stand for something much bigger than those three letters. I want to say to the audience that I welcome you. Also, I'll be taking audience questions throughout this Zoom. I'm going to read you where you can put your questions. You can submit questions at any time throughout the event, and I'll take as many as possible. For those of you joining us on the live stream or by phone, you can submit your questions by emailing events@mei.edu. And there's lots of you, there's 500 of you. So there's lots of interest in Saudi Arabia. I'm going to open this question to both of our panelists. And that is, has MBS continued to get away with murder? We are at yet another anniversary of the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. There's been new and interesting reporting on how he was being tracked before his death. And so I'm just going to open it up with that question. And let's start with ladies first, Susanne, and then to Ben.
Thank you very much, Deb, for the invite, and it's a great pleasure. Sadly, MBS is in the middle of a storm right now. He is the one who is considered as the responsible and who provided who ordered the killing. So does he get away with it? Actually, it depends very much on how he keeps, how he plays his cards. I mean, right now he's making more and more enemies. And if you have so many enemies inside the family, inside the kingdom, and if you don't have support outside of the kingdom, especially from the states, you definitely will have a problem on the long run. And at the same time, he doesn't deliver what he actually promised. I mean, which is not completely his fault, but at the same time, he promised that he will change the economy, he will reform the society, he will modernize the country, and he actually promised a pleasant life to his people. The opposite is happening. I mean, the economy is in an incredible bad situation, also certainly connected to COVID-19, but a lot of things are not going as smooth as he planned. And at the same time, a lot of people lean back and are not so sure whether they are still wanting to cooperate with him. I mean, if you look at Washington, certainly there's a very close connection with Trump, with the president. At the same time, the intelligence community and the political Washington is not happy with this crown prince. So actually, we haven't seen the end yet.
Ben, the stakes couldn't be higher for him. He can see what the price of oil is, and he knows that his economy depends on it. With stakes that high, how does he get out from, or can he get out from under the accusations?
Well, I mean, he certainly has his work cut out for him. I mean, if you look at sort of, the challenges facing the kingdom, and then you also look at the agenda that he has set for himself. If you look at Vision 2030 and the various other things that he's put forward, I mean, these are things that are, I think even in ideal circumstances, nearly impossible to carry out. He wants to take a country that's almost entirely dependent for all of its economic movement on oil and make it, somewhat, move it into a diversified economy, which as far as I'm aware, no country has yet succeeded in doing, moving from being so dependent on one resource to having a truly diversified economy. He wants to, everything from building NEOM to creating all these new industries, everything from cinema to arms production to mining to all of these different things that the kingdom really has no experience with. Solar energy, nuclear energy, there's all sorts of he really sort of has his plate full, and a lot of these things, I mean, I do think that we should say that, like, a lot of these initiatives are actually positive. Like, it's hard to read Vision 2030 and think that he's up to no good when you look at sort of these things that he wants to accomplish. But what we've seen along the way is that he's done so many other sort of nasty things along the way that will make it that much harder for him to do what was incredibly hard to do already. And that's, I think, where the killing of Jamal Khashoggi comes in. I mean, it would have been difficult enough to diversify the economy, create jobs for all these young Saudis who are graduating from universities and trying to find jobs in the private sector, which, you know, he hopes to sort of expand in Saudi Arabia. All these things are incredibly difficult. And, you know, then you do something like you have the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and then, you know, they sort of, you know, this week they I think from the Saudi perspective, brought it to a close. They said, oh, you know, we went through the full trial process. We had the investigation. We came up with these, you know, small group of fairly low level people, and we're going to put them in prison. And for them, it's kind of a case closed. But the lasting effect has to do with the branding of the kingdom. And I think the stain on Mohammed bin Salman himself. And that's going to last a long time. It's going to make it very hard for him to get a lot of Western companies that may have been interested originally to now come and set up offices in the kingdom or do projects with the kingdom. There's a whole reputational aspect to it that's really going to drag him down. So to the question of like, did he get away with murder? I mean, I think people who expected that MBS was going to be removed from office, or his father, the king, was going to pull him out and put another crown prince. I think that was all way too speculative, and I didn't think it was ever really possible.
Let me ask, and then I'll go to the questions because
for this intentionally.
And that is, why? You know, why was he such a threat? It was a gruesome murder. It was risky. You know, likely to be caught. I don't know if they thought about this. Susanne, you have something in your book that's interesting, and this is, you're talking to a British writer, John Bradley, who worked with Khashoggi, and he says the House of Saud operates like a mafia, and you know, Jamal had signed on to the mafia. What he didn't understand is it's a lifelong contract. And I want both of you, if you would please, to talk about why was it so important to eliminate Jamal? I mean, we all have known him for a long time, and I never thought of him as a threat to the kingdom, a threat that was so great that he needed to be chopped up in Istanbul. And so if both of you can address what it was that was so terrifying that he needed to be eliminated. We'll do ladies first again. Susanne?
I mean, what Bradley said is very focused. So at the same time, there is some truth in it when you say he checked into this closed society. It's a kind of a club of this elite in Saudi Arabia. He had incredible access to the royals, very influential royals. He worked for them very closely. He knew all the internal discussions going on. I'm sure he had a lot of insights about the secrets, which were kept in a very small circle of people. So this in itself is a threat, possibly. I mean, Khashoggi is certainly have never been a real threat to the kingdom, and also not to MBS, certainly not. That's over-exaggerated, but I think it was a complete new thing that somebody checked out from this inner circle. And I mean, this is how it must have been perceived from the ruler or from the crown prince, and was openly, publicly criticizing in one of the most prestigious newspapers in Washington, in exact that circle where MBS is just trying to create a positive image of himself. That was one thing. And at the same time, he represented a group which I think is indeed something the whole family is a kind of concerned about. He has close connections indeed to the Muslim Brotherhood. And in the book, you see a photograph which Jamal Khashoggi once gave me. It showed him and Osama bin Laden in a cave of Tora Bora. So they were sitting quite next to each other with all the fighters, all the mujahideen from the Arabic countries. And at that time, it means in the 80s, which is 40 years ago or 35 years ago, but it's not, I mean, they started at the same point. They were friends and parted way when Osama bin Laden then became an outlaw for the kingdom. They still had contact. It's not that they were enemies. So, but the idea which they had in the very beginning was something which is today represented by the Muslim Brotherhood. The people of a country should have a say. The people should participate in the political process, which is certainly the opposite of what the Saudi family is actually wanting for itself. And certainly, if you have an absolute monarchy, it's the last thing you want to have. You have to have somebody advocating for. So what he did, he checked out from that and he started to become a political figure himself. Not that he could really become a rival, but he became a political figure, possibly an alternative on the long run, maybe not himself, but the movement he was setting up with other opponents. And he never considered himself as an opponent, by the way, which he said in the last couple of weeks of his life. He said, I'm just actually fighting for my country in another way than the crown prince does. So he has a vision, had a vision for himself. And they wanted to set up a kind of a social media connected audience or group to discuss these things. So there is the possible fear that the crown prince and his confidants had were that this group could grow and could become this could become a threat in the long run, because now, I mean, Saudi Arabia is on the one hand a super traditional and super conservative country, but at the same time, they're using social media as we do. They are connected as we are. So even they survey each and every email going in and out. There is a sense of there is something happening which you cannot control. And to modernize not only the conversation people, I mean, this political conversation is something which they have no experience with. So far, there was a social contract that we would provide you with everything you need, and you keep out of politics. So since everything has changed there, including the economy, which is not guaranteeing a convenient life anymore for everybody, people would possibly start to think, why do I have to pay taxes all of a sudden? Why do I have to pay so much money for my water bill, for my electricity bill? My salary is cut back. So, I mean, what do I still can expect from this government? So people could possibly have a doubt whether this king or this ruler could provide for them in the future. And this all plays into this. And one very last thing, Khashoggi was so well connected. You knew him, Ben knew him, I knew him, everybody knew him. So he was a kind of interpreter of a country which nobody really understood well from outside. So he was actually the one who was shaping the image to the outside. And this was something he definitely could be very jealous about.
And Ben, what's interesting in Saudi Arabia is how much there is an opposition now outside the country. That used to not be true. But you know, we all know who they are and where they are. Why do you think he was such a threat?
I think it had to do with just kind of a concept of, you know, there have been all these different theories about it was this specific thing that Jamal did, or this specific person that Jamal talked to or developed a relationship. And I think it's much simpler than that. I think it was just straight up seen as disobedience. I mean, I agree with Susanne that he was, you know, he was an establishment figure in Saudi Arabia for many, many decades. He traveled with princes, he met with kings, he traveled on airplanes with kings, and he was the guy that outsiders would call them when they wanted to understand what some decision meant. Why did the kingdom do this? You would call up Jamal Khashoggi, and, you know, based on who he had met and whatever, he would kind of try to give you, you know, what he knew or his best guess or his best interpretation. And I think it was the fact that he had, as Susanne said, been such a part of that inside circle. And then all of a sudden he's on the outside and he's sitting in the capital of the kingdom's, you know, most important ally, really responding. I mean, if you go back and you look at his Washington Post columns, he was responding in real time to whatever was happening in the kingdom. So you would have, you know, the kingdom would suddenly like arrest a number of activists. And then like within a week or two, Jamal would come out with a column in the Post talking about why this was a really terrible idea. Or MBS was some new information would come out about NEOM, some new thing that they were going to do at NEOM. And then Jamal would come out with a new column talking about how he thought it was a really stupid idea and it was a waste of money, or it was, you know, not what the priority should have been for Saudi Arabia. And I really just think it comes down to a combination of his having been inside and then choosing to be outside and being such a critic. And I think the rules in Saudi Arabia changed. I think that historically Saudi Arabia it's always been, it's always been an autocracy, but I think it was kind of a soft gloved autocracy. I mean, it was nothing like Syria where you had just like, people getting mowed down in the streets by security forces and like, huge numbers of people just sort of disappear. Like it was never that brutal. It was never like Syria under Hafez al-Assad or like Saddam Hussein or under Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And you could sort of be critical and you could, if you were private and you weren't trying to organize anything and the government kind of looked the other way and it wasn't, but that very much changed under MBS. I mean, MBS changed the rules and basically let everybody know that, you're not supposed to disagree with me if you're a Saudi citizen. You're not supposed to do it publicly. And we saw this in all kinds of different ways, whether it was, the arrest of the women's rights campaigners who had spent years campaigning for exactly what MBS wanted to do, but he just didn't want them to be out there talking about it. You had other people who, questioned the wisdom of the Aramco IPO, and they ended up in jail, being tried for terrorism, various other sort of intense things. And I think the whole issue of Jamal just took it to another level. Just this idea that, who are you to go to Washington and question what I want to do? And I just think that they considered it a threat to his international standing, his attempt to sell himself in Washington, and they just felt it needed to be neutralized.
So we have a question from Julie Johnson Olson. I lived in Saudi Arabia for years. Does anyone know the health status of King Salman? Rumors years ago included advanced dementia. Thank you for this webinar. Shukran. So, I mean, this is the perennial question. I suspect that you can only speculate, that nobody really does know, but you could try.
I mean, as far as I know, I have somebody I spoke just the other day who is actually a lifetime friend of the king, and he sees him every couple of weeks, and he says he is actually fine. He is not, I mean, his health is certainly not perfectly stable. He also has been admitted to the hospital a couple of times, but it seems that he understands, he responds. Dementia is not something which is really limiting him so much. If it's there, it's in the beginning stage. I think which is much more what has a much more impact on his decisions is that almost nobody has access to him alone. So it seems that the access to the king goes through his son, and so certainly that's the same with the information which reaches him.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I won't claim to have sort of a detailed medical diagnosis of King Salman. I mean, you hear sort of a whole range of things. You hear, people who meet with him and sort of, are surprised at how sort of well he listens and engages. There's also examples of him, getting up in speeches and like completely losing his place and not knowing where he is in his text. And I mean, he's in his 80s, I mean, it's, but whether it's dementia or not, I mean, I'm not sort of in a place to make a diagnosis. I don't have any reason to believe that he disagrees with anything that Mohammed bin Salman is doing. And I do think that it was a deliberate choice to basically delegate all of this to Mohammed bin Salman. So I think at the end of the day, like, he probably is not involved in all of the details. And I'm sure that he doesn't know about every single initiative going on and he's not signing off on this and that. But I have no reason to believe that sort of MBS is doing big things behind his back, or that he sort of doesn't know what the general outlines are. And I think that people who have known King Salman through the decades will say that a lot of this are things that he would talk about being interested in, whether it was going after corrupt people and these princes who were wasting all this money and getting in trouble abroad and things like that. And so I do think that there's I don't think there's a lot of reason to believe that MBS is not acting on Salman's wishes, even though I don't think Salman is he's not involved in sort of the nitty gritty of everything.
There's one issue though that we've seen the king step in on, and it's the Palestinian issue. When MBS goes, apparently what the king thinks is too far, he does come out and say something. Although this week has been interesting with the UAE, they have allowed Israel to fly over Saudi to get to the UAE. Is that the only instance where that the king has something to say, or has there been any other time where he tries to rein his favorite son in?
It was said that he was furious about the Khashoggi murder, and he was not happy with that, obviously. And the Palestinian issue so far is the only topic I know where he stepped in, and that seems to be really a generational issue. I mean, as long as the king is alive, I don't see that there will be normalized relations between Israel and the kingdom if there is not a two-state solution, which is satisfying. And but that's definitely the only topic I know where he made a point which is obviously in the opposite of what his son would do.
And Ben, is there any way to know how they're feeling about this UAE decision? I mean, MBS and MBZ are very close, so they would have known about it. Is there any way to know? Does the king approve? Is this where will MBS come down?
I mean, I certainly don't know what the king thinks. I think that, I mean, there's no way that the UAE did this without sort of running it by Saudi Arabia. I'm sure Saudi Arabia's been involved, and Saudi Arabia has certainly engaged with Israel in various covert ways on its own, somewhat in tandem with the UAE or along with the UAE. And I just think that because of the complexities in their own domestic.
Uh-oh, that looks
very
like
small citizen population. Oh.
You just froze, Ben, so just pick up.
Oh, sorry. My Lebanese internet. No, I mean, the UAE is just a lot more, it's a lot more agile. You know, it's a small country with a small citizen population. It's much easier for the leadership to do what it wants to do and take risks and control any kind of domestic opposition or blowback. Whereas Saudi Arabia is like a really large, complicated place. You have, you know, you have a much larger population. You have a huge, you know, a much more ingrained tradition of social conservatism, and you have a whole other generation of people like Salman who not only supported the Palestinians but raised money for the Palestinians. And you know, these people have been talking about the Palestinian issue for, you know, for decades and decades. And so I think that, you know, I don't have any reason to believe that MBS sort of feels any of that old animosity towards Israel. I just think that he's aware of domestically how complicated it would be for him as opposed to Mohammed bin Zayed, who can just sort of do it. And if people in this society don't like it, well, it's too bad because there aren't that many of them and they're pretty easy to control.
We have a couple of questions. And that is, who is advising MBS? Is it possible to know who the voices are MBS listens to? This is from Christina Bracken. And Sam Wyman wants to know, please comment on the relationship between MBS and the UAE's MBZ.
As far as I know, I mean, MBZ is considered something like, I mean, MBZ is a little bit older, like 20 years older than MBS. So it's sad that he takes advice from him. And but in the closer circle, he has a lot of very, I would say, very well educated and very well achieved people. When I was in Jeddah to see those consultants of his, I mean, I found them brilliant people, but there are a couple of people I've never met, and this is the head of the MISC Foundation, who I tried to meet, and also his very close advisor, Saud Al-Qahtani, who I never met as well. But it's known that these gentlemen are obviously in his very close circle, and who he takes most advice of, I don't know. But certainly when it comes to the economic issues, he has great consultants around him. And I mean, there is nobody who would, I mean, it's an honor on the one hand, and at the same time, people are patriots and they come back and they quit jobs. And I mean, for instance, the former, the 2 days foreign minister, he was a businessman. He was the ambassador to Berlin before. I mean, he's a fascinating, very well read and very well educated gentleman. And I mean, he has a lot of great people around him.
He's also a big fan of NPR, as it turns out, the foreign minister. Ben?
Well, there's a range. I mean, you know, it's hard to know if there's sort of a, you know, who are the MBS whisperers who sort of give him some of these big ideas. he does have a lot of very talented people around him. I think both Saudis, people who have a lot of experience in the private sector and have been brought in to sort of give him advice. There are also some people that I think many Saudis and other people around the region scratch their heads on why he keeps them so close. I mean, the two ones that you hear the most about would be Sul Qahtani, who was sort of, involved in the nasty social media campaigns. At least the US government, has accused him of playing a big role in putting together the Khashoggi operation. And, this is somebody that, I think has a very thuggish reputation, both inside the kingdom and in Washington. You have Turki al-Sheikh, who was basically one of MBS's bodyguards, and then he put him in charge of the sports authority. Now he's, these are just people that MBS likes and trusts, that he's known for many years. And so he brings them along. There's not, a whole lot of reason to believe that they have really great judgment or even really great ideas, but he trusts them and they're close to him. And then you've got sort of all the foreign consultants, which is a very, very complicated issue, because these people are obviously, many of them incredibly well educated and experienced and worked in all these different countries and come in and give MBS, reports and advice but there's a weird incentive structure where, if you're a consultant, you want to get your next contract. So you don't want to sort of tell the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia that his idea is not a good one, or you don't want to, if you say, well, you want to fix the education system, it's going to take you 10 years. And he says, give me a project that will work in 6 months. Well, okay, you're going to deliver it, even if you think it's not going to work. So there's there's a huge amount to decision-making process. But when we look at the results that come out, it's a fairly mixed bag. I mean, I think some of the decisions have been quite good. Other things seem to be, decisions that are taken incredibly rashly. I mean, launching an oil war with Russia, at the start of a global pandemic. I mean, who advised him on that? And did anybody advise him on that? I mean, there's plenty of evidence that sometimes he just makes really rash decisions and lets them sort of play out.
And so far, and we have a question from Najad Khoury. Considering the close relationship with Trump, what would it be like? What's the perspective of MBS in the case of Biden winning the presidency? I'm sure that this is a question on the minds of many in Riyadh as well. It's been an extraordinary relationship. Susanne, are they talking about that?
I mean, it's obvious that there is a special relationship, in particular between President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and Mohammed bin Salman. Jared Kushner has done a lot to make this relationship working. It was kind of a bet that Mohammed bin Salman, already at a time when he was only Minister of Defense, would possibly become the next in line to the throne. And we all remember that situation when the president and his son-in-law were cheering once that happened, and when the former Crown Prince Mohammed bin Nayef was removed. This is a very close relationship, which has, I think, a part which we can analyze, which is in favor for the economy in the US. I mean, there is no business in the world which is bigger than the arms business between Saudi Arabia and the US. I mean, the amount of money which is involved here is beyond anybody's imagination. I mean, we saw in 2017 that President Trump and Saudi Arabia's Salman bin Abdulaziz, the king, signed a series of letters of intent that the kingdom would buy arms worth 350 billion over 10 years. Whether this is realistic or not, nobody can say. There are some people who would say that the kingdom can't pay for these arms any longer. But at the same time, I mean, there was an immediate purchase or an immediate contract about $110 billion. I mean, this is so much money. And certainly, I mean, Trump is a businessman. And as we recall how he reacted on the possibility that the Crown Prince is involved or possibly has ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, it's very obvious that he weighs business more than anything else, than human rights or principles or anything. So, and what we don't know, and this is completely, I think, you could say, untraditional that there is so much aside of the official protocol which is happening. Yeah, usually a visit or a telephone call or anything would go through the protocol, would go through the official instances which you have and levels which you have in an administration. This is not happening here. I mean, Jared Kushner picks up the phone and calls MBS whenever he wishes. So nobody in the State Department would know what these gentlemen are talking about, whether personal interests are possibly involved. Yeah, we will know later on. I mean, all these things at the end of the day find their way to public. I'm quite confident, and it seems also to be a personal match. So when it comes about when it comes to Biden, I mean, I don't know how much he will stick with his words once he would possibly be the next president. He said that he would treat the kingdom as a pariah state. I mean, I don't know whether this is very clever, but at the end of the day, he would not ignore human rights as much as the today's president does. And obviously, he has a more similar look or view at it like President Obama did. He made something which is also not really easy to understand. I mean, he was selling exact the same number, exact the same amount of arms, $110 billion, which was at that time the largest trade ever between Saudi Arabia and the US. But at the same time, he was acting differently politically. I mean, he agreed, or he made the nuclear agreement happening in Iran. And his message was, you guys have to live in that region somehow peacefully, and you need to share that region somehow. So I think you can do the one thing and not, and you don't need to agree with everything which is happening in the kingdom, which would certainly be more the path Biden would take if he becomes president.
But Ben, I wondered if the bigger question here, so there's always been two different relationships with Saudi Arabia and the United States. There's one with the White House, which is pretty consistent. Obama was probably an outlier, but pretty consistent. And then there's one with Congress. So should we really be asking if the Senate flips and you have a Democratic majority in both houses, no matter who the president is, does that impact the relationship with Saudi Arabia?
I mean, I think Saudi Arabia has a tremendous amount riding on this election. I mean, since Trump was elected, the Saudis have invested so much in this personal relationship while doing things that really ticked off pretty much every other part of the US government. You know, the treatment of Mohammed bin Salman, who was like a longtime partner of the CIA, angered a lot of people in the intelligence community. Jamal Khashoggi, that obviously, you know, a lot of people at State Department used to talk to him. A lot of people in Congress used to meet with him when he would come to town. A lot of people knew him. And so, you know, the way that he was killed, that angered a lot of people. The way that the Yemen war has been prosecuted has made a lot of people in the Pentagon uncomfortable. You know, you have all these Saudi pilots who have been trained to use American jets and drop American bombs, sometimes trained on American military bases, you know, that have just carried out a really atrocious war. And so there's, you know, and then of course you get to Congress, and you've had multiple efforts to try to cut off the arms sales to Saudi Arabia over Yemen, which the White House has always vetoed. And really the only sort of branch of government that you can point to right now that still is really publicly fond of Saudi Arabia is the White House. And so if Trump stays, then I think MBS has 4 more years of more or less, I wouldn't quite say impunity, but something like that. I mean, I think that if Trump remains in the White House, there's every reason to believe that he will continue to give Mohammed bin Salman the backing that he has in the past, which is to basically do whatever he wants. Okay, he wants to continue the war in Yemen. I'm going to veto any efforts to slow down the arms sales. He wants to, you know, murder a journalist. Okay, well, I'm going to sort of say, well, it's not that big of a deal, or it's not as big of a deal because he wasn't an American, and you know, he's constantly sort of given a pass. I think it's going to be very hard for the Saudis if Biden wins. I mean, the Saudis will tell you, you know, we've had a relationship with the United States since it goes back to FDR. security cooperation and the intelligence community. We have security cooperation with the military, that this is a strong institutional relationship. And there's part of that that's true. You know, you have these weapons contracts all have sort of long-term training components and maintenance components. And so there is that will continue. But just imagine, you know, what happens if MBS comes to Washington in January, 2021? Was Biden going to meet him in the White House? Is he going to sit next to him and have a photo op in the Oval Office? I mean, are people going to flood Pennsylvania Avenue with pictures of Jamal Khashoggi and holding up saws? And I mean, it's a really tricky time. And who in Congress is going to want to hang out with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia? I just don't. There aren't a lot of, they might find some people, but compared to sort of the reception that he received when he came to the United States in 2018, where he like sort of met everybody and everybody was so excited about this young, visionary reformer who's doing great things in Saudi Arabia, I think it's going to be very difficult for the Saudis to try to rebuild that kind of relationship. And I actually don't know, it's hard to talk about an administration that hasn't been elected and hasn't sort of put its policies in place. But if you look at Biden's rhetoric so far, he certainly doesn't feel like he has any political benefit from being close to the Saudis. And he actually seems to think he has a lot of political benefit to gain from being very critical of the Saudis. I mean, some of the things he's said have been incredibly powerful. And it's just hard to imagine sort of where's the group vote that flip for him because he decides he wants to be nice to Saudi Arabia. So I really think they have a lot riding on this election. And depending on what happens, it's going to be very interesting to see how they, try to move forward with that election if there's a change in the White House, or with that relationship if there's a change in the White House.
So we have a question again from Julie Johnson Olson. Nice job, Julie. MBS has said he's interested in bringing back, from pre-1979, a moderate brand of Islam in the kingdom. We've seen pop culture coming into Saudi Arabia, also more freedom for women. Can you speak to that? Is it just to appease the youth, or is there a deeper strategy behind all of this?
I think it's both. First of all, I mean, he absolutely understood, because he's a young gentleman himself, that the youth needs to let some steam off. They cannot live on in this kingdom, which is actually the kingdom of boredom. I mean, everything forbidden. I mean, you cannot meet anybody in public. You cannot go to cinema. You cannot sit in a coffee shop. You cannot listen to music. I mean, you have 70% youth under 30 years. So they are traveling, they find out, they know what's possible in other countries and why they shouldn't do that in their country. So actually that's something which was certainly a kind of a gift towards the younger generation. And it was also like kind of a glue, you and me, we are the same generation, and we will make this country great and create a new modernity which is a fit for all of us. At the same time, he also understood that religion and the extremism which was exported throughout the whole world was actually not working any longer and was an image spoiler and also a completely dangerous thing to do. And and certainly to push back the religious was a very brave move, not easy to do. He did it. Nobody else did it before. He has to be credited for that, I think, and that gave a huge relief to the people, not only the young people but everybody. About this, about the new industries. I mean, these industries are considered as the future of the country. I mean, if you want to transform this oil-dependent country in something else, which industries could be possible to be picked up by the new entrepreneurs? I mean, there is the entertainment industry, then there's the tourist industry. I mean, which is also a complete new thing. Saudi Arabia was a complete isolated country. Nobody else but pilgrims came to visit. I mean, nobody thought about going to Saudi Arabia to see the beautiful landscapes or to visit music festivals or something. Now it's happening again because of the pandemic. It's not possible to continue with that. It's both. It's to please the youth. It's a win-win, and at the same time provide job opportunities. About women, I mean, I think he is a modernizer in that way, and he completely understood that women are the catalyzer in an economy. And once you cannot provide this wealth any longer to your people, in many families, it's necessary that the women work too. So you need two incomes to feed your family. I mean, the jobs might not be the greatest. You see the women working at the cashiers of a supermarket or selling food in food trucks or something. But at the end of the day, to give them the permission to do that safeguards the income of families which are at the edge. If you are laying people off, or if you don't hire any longer, the government has 80% of the workforce work for the government. Means that if you don't hire anymore, the next generation will not benefit from that possibility any longer. So I think it's a whole bunch of things which he considered, and that's really a very positive movement. And you can look at it from each angle. The older people were kind of annoyed, and many would believe this is not what we really need and want to have. There is critique, but at the end of the day, I think it's a very brave and good move he did here.
Ben?
I should first say that I think that the whole 1979 narrative is like profoundly misleading. This idea that before 1979, Saudi Arabia was this like open liberal country or whatever. Like, no, it wasn't. It's always been like an incredibly conservative place, very, very socially conservative. Yeah, there were a handful of movie theaters, and yeah, Western women probably had a little bit more freedom in certain limited places to wear sort of non-Saudi clothes, but it was an incredibly conservative place, and it's always been a conservative place. This is baked into the history of what Saudi Arabia was before 1979, after 79. We can talk in some other forum about the changes that took place in 1979. It was an important moment, but this idea that, but that said, I don't feel any reason to be cynical about what MBS is trying to do on the social front. You have a lot of people who will say, oh, he's just letting women drive to make the West happy, or because he's doing PR, or he wants to, bring in movie theaters because it looks good. And I don't believe that at all. I don't really have any reason to doubt his sincerity. And I don't see any reason to doubt that this is the kingdom that he wants to have. He doesn't want to have a kingdom where everybody's bored all the time. He doesn't want to have a kingdom. I think he thinks a lot like he understands. I think it's one of his strengths is that he really understood that younger demographic in the kingdom. I think he called it for what it was, and he realized, there's an economic component. All these people, whenever they get the chance, they go to Dubai or they go to Bahrain or they go wherever they can to sort of, see movies and do all the things that they couldn't do in the kingdom. But I think it's just generally what he wants the kingdom to be. He wants it to be a pleasant place. He wants to be a place where people can have fun and where they can spend their money and they can go to amusement parks and monster truck shows and things like that. And I think growing up, he was frustrated that he didn't have this stuff. And so now he wants to bring it in. And the plus, I think, is that it's going to be good for the economy. I think there's a political aspect to it too, in that he's, as much as in an autocracy you have constituencies, he would like the youth to be his constituency. He wants to have their support, and he wants to have them be behind him, even though, he's never going to stand for election or anything. And I think it's also a message to these conservatives, to these people who thought that they could sort of boss the royals around and tell them, this is the way that you're supposed to do it, to really tell them game over. It's like, if you can bring, Mariah Carey to do a concert, I mean, why do these, clerics, really think that they have the ability to tell you what to do anymore? So I think it's, I think there's a lot of things going on there, but, and it's actually, I think, of all the aspects of the reform project, it's the one that I'm most optimistic of. I think he called the demographics right. I think that there is a market for all of this stuff in the kingdom. I think it's, maybe it won't be as great as he expects. You won't have as many movie theaters or, the entertainment city he's building outside of Riyadh. Maybe it won't be quite as large as he expects it to be. But I do think that we will look back at Saudi Arabia in 15, 20 years and say, like, yeah, it was during this period that it became a very, very different place on the social front. And I think he should get credit for that.
Could you talk a little bit, though, about the details of this? For me, it's head spinning. I mean, when I arrived in 91 in Saudi Arabia, I could order my ice cream in Baskin Robbins, but I couldn't eat it inside because I was banned from being in there. And the change has been remarkable. And I wondered, is everybody coming along at the same speed? I mean, if your dad is conservative, he can tell you can't drive. He can, no matter what your crown prince tells you. You can be banned from marrying somebody that's too liberal, no matter what the crown prince tells you to do. Do you find that there is all these contradictions in people's heads about, all right, can I do this? I don't know. If my dad says I can't, can I not? Could you just talk about sort of this social change? And is it through all the classes? Is this just for the rich, or will it take a while for it to get to the poor?
Deborah, you would see the most obvious change certainly in the elite and in the rich class, because they have lived like that outside the country, and then they put on the veil and play Saudi Arabia again when they come back. But certainly the most interesting is the middle class, and here it's pretty much as you are describing. I mean, you have. The law has changed. The leadership on the top has given you the permission. That does absolutely not necessarily mean that you may do that. So if your father is against it, or if your father wants to control your movements, he still does. And differently from here, I mean, it's almost impossible not to live whatever in peace with your family. If you don't have peace with your family, you are at war with everything and everybody. So because it's almost impossible to survive in that country. It's a family country, it's a clan country, so it's a tribal country, and to misbehave means you become an outcast. It's almost impossible not to live in peace with your family. So women would hesitate, even they would love to move out into their apartment, into an own apartment. They would not dare. Even if they are incredibly well educated, even if they have lived abroad. The father is very strict about it, the mother is heartbroken, so you don't want that. So the other thing is, you have an ongoing discussion in the families. I mean, it's like in the 60s, 70s, 80s in the Western countries. Women have to fight for their rights. They have to fight for the space of self-determination, and they do that very differently than in our countries, because certainly they are not so offensive, they are not so straightforward. They want to also have peace with their husbands. But it's a constant negotiation process, and it's very odd sometimes. I mean, I can tell you two little stories. One is a friend of mine. Her husband is an officer. They travel the world. They are really kind of moderate people, but he doesn't allow her to leave the city, which is actually already a lot of liberty for a Riyadh mother. Yeah, so she can roam around and she can go wherever she wants, but she may not leave the city, and this has not changed at all. She can take the children somewhere else for holidays or something. So it's always, the security issue is always with you. Like, can you guarantee that that nothing happens to the children? And nobody can guarantee 100%, but certain. So it's the same debate I think we had in the 60s or 50s, maybe in the West. And then there is another phenomenon. You have ladies who are like in their 20s, 30s, who actually have passed the time when they have completely benefited from that reform or change, or from this transformation of the country. They're too old already to pick it up. For instance, I have a friend, she's a banker, and she lives in one of the most conservative places in Buraida. You cannot imagine, I mean, the rules are really, you have zero contact, until now, zero contact with men. It's a complete segregated society, yeah? So you still sit in a very lovely, nice, wonderful rooftop restaurant. Everything looks exactly like in Paris, London, New York, whatever, but you are still in a small little tent with a setup for women and men, yeah. So the waiter knocks at the door and asks for permission to come inside. Then everybody gets wailed again. He serves food and leaves again. And this has not changed. And she would love to marry somebody, but not the person her father would have in mind for her. And she put down a couple of gentlemen who have proposed for her because she didn't want to. Because that was fine, but she will leave alone. Yeah, she will be left alone because she will not find somebody who yeah, she's like caught in the middle of these past and future, which is not there yet. So I think a lot of people will struggle with that and it's a constant negotiation as we saw it. Women have to fight for their liberation as we did as well.
Ben?
I mean, it's a hugely dynamic time. I think one mistake, or sort of one tendency I think we tend to have in the West, is we assume that people in other countries want to be like us. I think that there's a tendency in a lot of the writing about Saudi Arabia to assume that like everybody graduating from university really wants to be a New Yorker, like really wants to like go out drinking and dancing, and all the women want to be doing that. You know, it's like, but like the conservative is, it's, you know, conservative Saudi Arabia part of the culture. And I think what's interesting about the way that MBS has done it is that historically this conservatism was reinforced by the government. So you had, you know, sort of the quote unquote religious police, the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, who would patrol public places. And what MBS has done is he hasn't changed the society, but he's pulled the state out of that equation. And so instead of having, you know, these guys who work for this, you know, for the religious police going around with their sticks and sort of telling women, you need to cover up, or why are you sitting with this guy who's not your brother? Now that's all sort of been pushed to the family level. You know, you don't have the, you know, the state's not involved in that kind of policing anymore, that kind of interaction, not in the way that it used to be. And so a lot of this stuff is just going to have to work itself out in society, which I think in a lot of ways, you know, I think the comparison to the 1960s is apt. Like maybe that's where it should work itself out. You know, it's that these families need to work out what their own rules are, and the state shouldn't necessarily be involved where a woman gets to or not. But I mean, I do think that unfortunately, because of the restrictions on reporters going to Saudi Arabia, working in Saudi Arabia, I haven't been allowed in since mid-2018. And if I could go in, these are exactly the kinds of stories I would like to do. I just think it's such a dynamic time. This is such a society that's in the midst of such dramatic change. And it's not something you can write about from abroad. You know, you really have to get there and talk to people and see people. And I don't think that outside we see enough of that complexity of what's going on in this society while it goes through this period of, you know, really rapid change.
So we're going to go from the ground to the air and take on the toughest topic of all in the last 8 minutes. And it's Iran. So we get a question: do you think that MBS has a personal vendetta against Iran, or is he amiable to dialogue, especially since the US did not escalate things with Iran this summer? So this will be
the first part of that phrase.
Do you think MBS has a personal vendetta against Iran, or is he amiable to dialogue?
I mean, during King Abdullah times, there was a personal relationship between King Abdullah and the cleric Rafsanjani. So this helped a lot to coordinate or to settle issues when they became difficult. This kind of relationship, or this kind of personal relationship, doesn't exist right now any longer, I think, which is difficult. At the same time, there is contact on a diplomatic level. And what I have observed is that the view towards Iran is a national issue. People feel threatened by Iran. And Iran became a kind of, I mean, they're playing their cards really smart. While MBS is, or the government and the alliance is burning itself and a lot of resources and causing terrible atrocities on the ground in Yemen, Iran made itself so important with such a small leverage in Yemen, and only slowly stepping up and stepping into this conflict, and now became so important for the Houthis, which has not been the case before. So this is how they work and do all over the place, and it's true. I see that, but I think they are not really understanding that this could be solved by negotiations. I think the Iranians would do, because they know how to play. And at the same time, if the Saudis do not provide a plan which is interesting enough for the Iranians, they would go forward with their, I mean, what they do is always the same thing. They attach with a small group, a religious group of Shia or something, or somebody they can work with, support them with little means, and if necessary with more, with a military consultants. And this relationship grows. And this is what they have done in Lebanon. This is what they have done in Yemen, in Syria, so many other places. And it works very well. So if you really want to have a shift here, you need to give Iran a complete different place in that region. You need to open the whole package of sanctions and everything. So this country is almost suffocated, and they need to live again. And if you don't provide this opportunity, and I think the Saudi Arabians have a lot of influence here, this will go on forever, and it's deadly for these countries. And what you see in Syria now, what you see in Lebanon, what you see in Yemen, this is all a consequence of these proxy wars. And yes, it's a kind of personally, but at the same time, I mean, it can be done by negotiations. And I hope that that the government of Saudi Arabia tries to find out the right path, and it certainly only goes with the help of the Americans.
Ben, I once heard Iran's foreign minister say, you know what our problem is? We're too big. We're just too big for the Saudis, and we can't change that, and it's not our fault, but that's what the problem is at the very end. Oops, I think you froze. No, come back, Ben.
MBS has plenty of, am I frozen again? Oh.
Yeah, you froze.
Am I frozen again? All right. No, it's clear from the way that MBS talks about Iran that there's lots of, that he personally doesn't, he doesn't have any fondness for the country, but there's a lot of strategic issues here too. I don't think it's just a personal beef. I mean, Iran is like a smaller country than Saudi Arabia without as much money, that's managed to get tremendous, influence that greatly outweighs its resources in all of these countries around Saudi Arabia. And I think that makes the kingdom very nervous. When you look at sort of what they've done in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, when you look at sort of the attack that they carried out last summer on the Aramco facilities, I mean, Saudi Arabia has a lot of very legitimate reasons to distrust the Iranians and to be angry at the strategic foothold that they've gotten in the region. What they do about that, I think it comes back to sort of, is still a very in his early 30s. He has not been doing this for a very long time. He doesn't have like tremendous experience as a statesman. And he's a Saudi nationalist. This is somebody who believes that Saudi Arabia is the biggest, most powerful, richest, most important country in the region, and nobody should push them around. I mean, this is the way that he sees it. And so I think it infuriates him that the Iranians have managed to do this. And so the question going forward is going to be, how long does he sort of stick to these maximalist demands? The way that they did in Yemen, basically saying the war in Yemen only wins when Iran leaves and the Houthis give up everything that they won in the war, and then, okay, then we'll have peace. So they've kind of walked that a bit back. But, maybe as time goes forward, MBS will sort of realize, okay, I can't actually, make these kinds of demands against Iran and win. We're going to have to find some other way forward. We're going to have to find some kind of accommodation. I just think we've seen hints of that after the Aramco attacks, and especially somebody mentioned the fact that, the United States did not immediately come to Saudi Arabia's aid and did not go bomb Iran to sort of punish them for carrying.
Uh-oh, Ben, you froze?
Oh, my back's still frozen.
There you are, you're back. So just go back.
Sorry.
Roll the tape back one sentence.
After the Aramco attacks, when it became clear that the United States was not going to come and punish Iran for the sake of the Saudis, they reached out. There were back channel talks led by the Iraqis and the Pakistanis that weren't peace talks. They didn't result in any sort of summit or any sort of formal agreement, but they did succeed for at least a period of bringing down the temperature a little bit. And so, I mean, I think it's one good indication that, MBS may have realized through that experience that sometimes diplomacy works. Sometimes you're not going to get everything that you want. Sometimes you're going to have to find more practical ways to try to, deal with ongoing situations. And so it's going to be very interesting to see, as he, is in power longer period deal with the Iranian issue.
So we are at 10:59, and I'm afraid to go forward, although we have lots and lots of questions. Let me ask my hosts, can we take one more, or do we have to wrap it up? You can answer that question on chats. Yes, okay. I am going to then ask one more question because I can if I want to. So all of you who can stay with us do for the last question. So this one is from Samira Kawar. Given the absence of a political agenda to accompany MBS's drive to diversify the economy and essentially end the rentier model of the economy, can this transformation succeed? Will people accept to eventually start paying taxes without some sort of political accountability representation? And we can go pretty fast with these last questions.
I mean, certainly that puts the whole idea of the absolute monarchy and the whole system and the social contract at stake. This question, I mean, it worked as long as the Saudi government could provide. Can they still provide for much longer? We don't know. I mean, at the moment, it doesn't look so great. The economy is really bad because the oil prices are so low, and it seems they don't come back. Renewable energy is not there yet to replace it, and the new industries are also not there yet. I don't see at all that the Saudi government, it would absolutely surprise everybody if the Saudi government gave the people of Saudi Arabia kind of a participation instead of this contribution which they made so far. What I think is that this is the big question for the next coming 10 years. We should all hope that it's working out, because an unstable Saudi Arabia nobody wants.
Ben, you get the last word.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, as sort of partisans of Western democracy, we like to think that you can't do economic development without political development and without, you know, sort of political participation and democracy. And I think the world record is pretty mixed. I mean, you can look at China, you can look at Singapore. I think MBS pays particular attention to the UAE, which is a very authoritarian place, but has managed to sort of do a lot of the things that MBS wants to do. I think that the bigger question for him is really, can he deliver on the economy? You know, that I think is the huge challenge. And I don't feel like inside of Saudi Arabia, you have huge movements of people calling for democracy or calling for political participation. I think that what people are most interested in there are my children going to have a city? Am I going to have a standard of living that's anything close to what my parents had? Oh, frozen again.
It's okay. We got all the way to, am I going to have the same standard of living?
Yeah, and yeah, you know, I think that people's, you know, the bread and butter issues matter of sort of, is this new crown prince going to deliver the economy for us? Is, you know, all of these, you know, grand plans and initiatives and whatever, are they going to make our lives better? And I think that the problems really come if they don't. If we get 10 years, 5 years, you know, 20 years down the road, and a lot of these young people are still unemployed, it's going to make it much more difficult for him. I mean, is there going to be a democratic uprising, something like that? I don't know. It's sort of impossible to speculate about it. But I think the big challenge for him is not on the politics. It's really on the economy. And I think this is what people are watching him for.
I'd like to thank both of you, Susanne Koelbl, who wrote Behind the Kingdom's Veil, and Ben Hubbard, who wrote MBS. Thanks for this hour. It's been great. It's recorded. So for any of you who missed the beginning, the middle, or the end, you will find it on the Middle East Institute site. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for the great presentation.